The original Axis and Allies debuted in the 1980s and has many similar elements to the modern game. In this version, players could control the USSR, the UK, and the United States on the side of the Allies, or Germany and Japan on the side of the Axis powers, with the goal of capturing territories on the worldwide battlefield and winning World War II. While there were troops all over the board like the newer games, the classic version had fewer territories to capture, which in many cases made for a quicker game, especially if the British and Americans were unable to support the Russians in time to save them from an all-out blitz by the Germans. The classic version included the ability to spend money to do research projects and give your country extra bonuses. This concept has been adopted into a few of the Axis and Allies games that have come out since then, but not all of them. Today, there are 3 standard levels of the Axis and Allies World War II series. Axis and Allies 1942 is the standard game in the modern day. It serves the same major purposes of the classic game with a few significant differences. First, there are more territories and more starting troops on the board. The German Blitz of Moscow is much more challenging to accomplish in the modern game because there are more territories to get through to reach Moscow. Additionally, India is a territory that starts with production for the British, which it did not in the classic game, which makes it a more attractive target for the Japanese, but it is a much more challenging target to capture, which again makes for a longer game than the classic game. The British have a stronger navy in the Pacific in this version as well. The factors that I mentioned create greater balance in this version, and the greater balance means that the game can extend much longer than the classic game before each side knows who is winning and who will ultimately win the game. Axis and Allies 1941 creates a simpler gameplay experience. The rules are the same as 1942 with just a few modifications, but the board, setup, and income are all much smaller. If the prospect of playing the full game of 1942 sounds intimidating either for the scope or time limitations, 1941 is a much quicker game to set up and play, as the troops will be knocked out quickly, and a low income means there will only be a few replacements to send into battle. For the player who likes long games and a lot of depth and strategy, 1941 may not be the best choice because the choices are much more limited in this version of the game. But I have found this version is great to introduce Axis and Allies to my kids in a way they can get used to the rules and the rhythms of the game without it becoming completely overwhelming to them. Axis and Allies Europe 1940 takes the conflict of World War II and zooms in on the battles of Europe during World War II. Italy is an additional Axis power that has a focus on conquering North Africa, and France is a fully functional Allied power to start the game. Germany has a distinct advantage with the enormous amount of troops they have available at the beginning of the game, but their drawback is they have a lot more to conquer, as they must defeat France and acquire more territory in Europe before they turn their focus on the Soviet Union. The intensity of the battles is higher and the armies are larger. There is a wide array of choices that each side can take to accomplish their goal of domination of Europe. Similar to Europe 1940, Pacific 1940 zooms in on the battle of the war in the Pacific. The Japanese have a massive navy that is far stronger than the opposing countries on the board, though the United States has the capacity to build up quickly. This conflict starts after the Japanese have built up their navy to be extremely strong, and they have started their invasion of China. They have not yet attacked Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, or the resource-rich areas of French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies. The United States has the capacity to build up its military over time, but it is far away from the conflict, and it is a long process to prepare to fight and bring that might to bear against the Japanese. The British are in control of India, and they need to fight off the Japanese. Anzac, which is Australia, New Zealand, is a separate faction, as is the Chinese army on the mainland China. This version creates an interesting dilemma for the Japanese, as they can focus on attacking the US to slow them down, going after Australia, conquering China, or going after India. While India is an excellent strategic target, it is challenging to conquer and might leave Japan open to attacks by other countries. China and Anzac might be easier to defeat, but the strategic value of those gains may not be worth the resources and time required to conquer them. An all-out assault on the US allows the US to chip away at the Japanese forces while the US builds up their own army and navy to fight. There are many choices in this version that allow for an invigorating game. Global 1940 is the biggest of the Axis and Allies games. This version is created when you take Europe 1940 and put it together with Pacific 1940. The game combines the distinct aspects of each game with few minor changes. The overall game is truly epic in scale. Unless you have full days, weekends, or weeks available to set up and play this game, it is likely that you will need the ability to leave the game set up to truly play it. It takes a long time just to set up, let alone the 1 hour plus that each round can take, so this game can end up taking a long time. This scale may not be feasible for players who don't have the ability to play the game over the course of multiple days and sessions or leave the game set up, but all the interesting dynamics that are present in Europe 1940 and Pacific 1940 editions remain in the full-scale game, with the additions of each side having additional countries that they can work together with to achieve victory. While the games I previously mentioned play out the full World War II conflict at different levels of scale, there are other editions that have been released that have different takes on this system. The first alternate take is the Anniversary Edition, which is very similar to the original editions of Axis and Allies, but it has Italy as a playable faction with the original 5. While Italy is available in the Europe or global version of 1940, this version allows the Axis to use that faction on a smaller scale game that is much closer to Axis and Allies 1942 than 1940. Axis and Allies Zombies adds a goofy wrinkle to the game by making troops that die on the battlefield come back as zombies that will attack both sides. This version is fun for me since I have played different versions of the game for years, and it was cool to change things up a bit. But unless a new Axis and Allies player really loves the zombie theme and their disruption to the battlefield that will happen as a result of the zombies being on the battlefield, one of the other versions might be a better game to play. Axis and Allies 1914 highlights World War I. This is actually my favorite version of Axis and Allies due to the fact that it plays so differently from the other ones. The conflict starts with the outbreak of World War I, and players are mostly reliant on ground troops to punch a hole in the enemy lines. It is an inefficient meat grinder that reflects the terrible waste of resources that was World War I. Germany is very strong in this game, but the Allies combined have a lot of strength. The Germans have options like attempting the Schlieffen plan to take out France first or going straight after Russia, and the Allies can decide whether to go after the Ottomans to wipe them out or go all in for Germany. There are additional strategic aspects to this game, including the fact that the US is neutral for the first few turns of the game, and if the Central Powers close in on Moscow, the Russian Revolution occurs and Russia is knocked out of the game. Axis and Allies has other games that use the same mechanics to highlight individual battles in World War I. Each of them has their own individualized gameplay and rules, and they play a little bit differently. So that's it, a comparison of the different versions of Axis and Allies. If you found this video helpful, hit the like and subscribe button for more board game related content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.